Yeah, it was a fun tournament, wasn't it? You know, I wouldn't say I was skeptical going in, because anytime you wrap an athlete in the flag, chances are they're going to compete for their country. I mean, that's just in the DNA. I didn't think it would be up to Stanley Cup final pace as quickly as it got to. I didn't expect it to be as physical as it was. Now, last Saturday night aside, I got to tell you, fellas, I couldn't speak for the first 5 minutes of that hockey game. I was at the Bell Center, and I'm standing. I got Mike Johnson on my left. I got the O-Dog on my right, and those two guys are almost weeping, like they literally are overwhelmed with emotion of what we're seeing here, in sheer disbelief. So, I mean, when you look back at all of it, and then of course, you know, you've got the overtime winner scored by McDavid, just from a national perspective, and then from an event standpoint, best case, absolute wildest dreams of the National Hockey League and the Players Association that this played out the way it did from beginning to end, with all the drama on ice and all the nonsense off the ice. It all boiled into this national rivalry, which I don't think that Bettman and Marty Walsh and everyone associated had any clue would get to the point that it got to.
Well, Rhett was saying it's Bettman. He's some kind of an evil
genius.
Back channeling Trump. Yeah.
He's politically dialed in. He was down at the Mar-a-Lago making sure Trump put some stuff out to cause some tariff.
So now that the tournament's over, Gary.
Wow. Fellas, there is a bit of a backstory here, and how much Bettman was involved as opposed to Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly, or both. I mean, they kind of work hand in hand. I mean, clearly Daly is Gary's right-hand dude, and you've got Walsh and Ron Hainsey from the Players Association. But this concept was basically thrown at NHL owners. Oh, by the way, we're doing this. It's going to be in February. We're shutting down the league. There is a risk of your top players getting hurt, which we experienced here, but it's a jump start. We're boosting the international calendar. Here we go. And there was some pushback. There were some owners that are like, nah, I don't think this is a good idea. It's not best on best. It's best on best available. So we're manufacturing an event, and the risk to us as owners, if my star goalie goes down, my top center goes down, one of my best defensemen in Shea Theodore goes down, I'm going to have some issues. But I mean, that's the risk that you take. But in the end, it worked out.
Are they still, like, would there be owners? Obviously, there's guys that got hurt. Are there owners out there, even with the success that we can all see, that would criticize what they've done?
Probably not, because again, when you're a billionaire, chances are you made some mistakes along the way to get to that. I mean, you're a risk taker. That's that's how you kind of encourage and develop enormous wealth. But they also like to mitigate risk when they get to that level. And that was what it was all about. That was a pushback. It wasn't about, manufacturing a spectacle. These owners want as many eyeballs as they possibly can. Don't forget, they're in the midst of a negotiation here for their national television rights. Like, Rogers' exclusivity window closes in a week, end of February.
For negotiating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they have exclusivity,
right?
Yeah, they have exclusivity, and then Bell, whoever else wants, can come in. So a bit of a boon, yeah, perhaps, because when you've got fans and media outside of the sport of hockey salivating over what went down last Saturday night at the Bell Center in Montreal, I mean, you can't buy that kind of advertising. Bettman has been looking for that with the Amnets, the American networks, forever. I mean, when's the last time we saw, let's use ESPN as the example here. I mean, their sports shows with the National Hockey League, which in essence it is, right? It's it was a Four Nations Faceoff, but all-star NHL players, leading shows, and then you go deeper in, and then you've got reaction from PK Subban, you got reaction from Messi. I mean, this is the stuff that Bettman and NHL owners dream of.
I saw Stephen A. Smith on ESPN this morning. He said he was on that flight, east-west, west-east, whatever, cross-cut. He says every TV was on the hockey game.
Yeah.
in the plane, which is crazy.
And to capture the casual American sports fan is huge, because I think we don't understand how fourth place this league is in the U.S. Like, there is not an American market where the hockey team's the biggest team. There isn't.
I mean, there'd be high school football games that would outrate an NHL game.
And then on top of that, you're seeing this international fervor. So not only just sports fans in North America, but like people all over the world. Like we've got a fan that watches the show in Australia. He's like, they're talking about it on radio here. They never talk about ice hockey. Like, this was a huge event for the sport.
Look at these buffoons.
Exactly. Oh, they love it. Yeah. Oh, mate, look at these.
Yeah, there will be some big high level meetings. How do we capitalize on this momentum? How do we keep this moving forward?
Yeah,
because it's undeniable. They could not have hoped. There's no, if you would have thrown this on the table, well, here's what could potentially happen if we do this.
So here's Boomer, to that point. Here's my hope, and it's not an expectation. It's just dream world. We're going into the final leg of the regular season, and obviously the playoffs. Well, naturally the intensity is going to hype up when the playoffs roll around. I hope that every player that wasn't at the Four Nations watched some of it, and a good chunk of it, and recognized, aside from the shenanigans of last Saturday, just the pace of play. I bumped into Sidney Crosby last Friday. And this was, of course, prior to, the game against the Americans. And I said, what's been the most surprising thing? That's still relatively early in the tournament. And he goes, man, how fast it is, the pace. And he goes, the only thing I can equate it to is a Stanley Cup final or an Olympic tournament. Like, that's it. And so maybe in that, and I don't want to go into the international rabbit hole, because there are still some battles that need to be waged between the IIHF, the National Hockey League, and the Players Association. Could that impact the Olympics? All of that will be reported on in the days to come. But the IIHF has insisted a September tournament as opposed to stopping play in the European federations in February. You're not getting the same level of pace of play in September. Guys don't want their summers cut short at all. So what are we going to go back to the 1987 Canada Cup when Mike Keenan dragged those poor bastards into training camp like 3 weeks in advance of that's not happening. That's not the real world. So I'm hoping that, the players who weren't working on their suntans, deservedly so, did watch some of the hockey, and the pace that we're going to see with at least some of the 14 games that are back on the regular season schedule tomorrow are going to represent some of what we saw.
We were really worried about the Feb time slot, and I think that was probably overstated when you see how much of a quiet spot it is on the sports calendar. Like, baseball hasn't started spring training. They're just reporting nobody cares. Football's done.
Sweet spot.
And the NBA regular season is meh to begin with.
Brilliant call.
And so, we were like, shit, if it's good, you can always move it to September. Now I'm like, I think it has to be February, because the whole world went nuts over this thing.
Yeah. And again, you do have to defer to the player, because the Players Association is a partner in this with the National Hockey League. And, the stars of the game, the faces of the sport, convened in Montreal and in Boston. They gave it their everything. Absolutely gave it their everything. They're going to do the same thing at the Olympics, and they'll do the same thing at the World Cup of Hockey, I think, in 2028. But they've already embraced the investment required, and not for that short period of time, not for the tournament of the Four Nations Faceoff. Everything else, like, they don't practice anymore because the schedule is so condensed.
Yeah.
So these guys are finally tuned. When they come out of training camp, boom, let's go. And they're now conditioned and programmed physically and mentally to deal with the rigors and just how difficult it is to get to that regular season. So February makes so much sense now.
You had something.
Well, I was going to ask, you got guys that are getting injured. Teams in first place, it sucks, but it's not as big a deal. Who's got the bumps and bruises that are, it's going to go back like a Brady Tkachuk that's got to go back to Ottawa and try and keep that alive, right? Some of these guys would have I don't think Pittsburgh's putting a push on the playoffs. Maybe I'm wrong.
Boston,
but Crosby can have some downtime, right? Like, there are players that give a little bit of a rest, or even if they are hurt, it doesn't affect your playoff hopes as much.
No.
There's a group of teams that get in. They can't sacrifice.
I mean, yeah, I'm looking at Ottawa. I'm looking at Boston. You know, I mean, Charlie McAvoy is an enormous loss, and they've got Lindholm, who's also injured, right? And McAvoy's going to be a while. I mean, we all see him. We saw him on social media. You know, read the lineup to Team USA going into that one with a sling on his right shoulder. So he's going to need a little bit of time. You know, Brady didn't look great walking in, but you know, he played the game that Brady Tkachuk normally plays, very physical, right? Didn't seem to be hampered. Ottawa needs the best of Brady Tkachuk to lock down, stay in the playoff hunt. They absolutely do. And then you look beyond that, and you know, there's no jeopardy of Florida missing the playoffs, but they want to win the division. It matters. They proved that it matters. I think Matthew's going to be a while.
Mhm.
I think that one's a problem. I've heard rumblings of what it is, and I'm not going to repeat it. Because yeah, it could be a lengthy situation. He was likely to see Florida doctors today, or worst case tomorrow. You know, you take Matthew Tkachuk out of the equation for however long, that's a pretty big hole. And then Shea Theodore, we already talked about, and we don't entirely know if Alex Pietrangelo is going to be healthy as they get their regular season back on track. So even the top end teams, you know, they could feel the pain and suffering of this.
And you were saying that could set up a LTIR.
Yeah, imagine
situation for
Florida with another 9 million dregs. Like
'Cause-
everyone gets mad at McCrimmon when he does it, but
Yeah.
That'll be the quick
Zito's not afraid.
It'll be the quick shift here as teams now. Okay, trade deadline is right away. How do we address our teams for sure?
Well, and where are you shopping? You know, in terms of what department here, the high rent district, or you're just trying to, Florida's not leaving cap space. No, none of the contending teams are. Like, you know, we look at Vegas because we're more recently reminded of what Vegas has had to go through with Mark Stone and all of that, and how they remedied. And before that, it was Nikita Kucherov and the Tampa Bay Lightning. So I recorded the pod with Ray Ferraro earlier today, and while we were recording, an NHL club exec who shall remain unnamed sent me a note, and he said, "What do you think the percentage chance is that Doug Armstrong tries to parlay the success around Jordan Bennington?" And I'm like, ooh, okay.
If they're selling, why not, right?
Why wouldn't you? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, we've been talking about the idea of, and the reason I bring it up is because we've been talking about the idea, rightfully so, Braden Shen potentially being in play. He's a captain of the St. Louis Blues. If Army decides that now is the time that they've got to renovate, well, there's two assets that probably aren't going to command more than they will right now with some of the contenders that may have significant need, injury, or otherwise. If Jordan Bennington can give you that game that he played last night on a team like, I don't know, pick at Edmonton, LA might need some goaltending attention. I mean, you can come up with a few other teams here, right? You know, it's a big if, but he does now have that resume. I know that 2019 is 6 years ago, but just walk down that path with Craig Berube, which I did the other day, and he'll tell you that they probably don't win the Winnipeg series. You know, the was a game 7 against Dallas overtime. He came up big there. You know, game 7 against the Boston Bruins in the Stanley Cup final, held them alive in that first period. Sure, there's been a lot of trouble in between, but evidently he still has plenty of game left. So we'll see what Armstrong and the St. Louis Blues do, if anything, with a guy like that.
2 years left at 6. That's suddenly not long.
Modified, no trade.
Yeah.
It's not
just
bad.
$1 million more than Joey Decord. Let's go.
Yeah.
Just a little bit, yeah. And Kevin Lankinen, who we'll talk about in a minute. But with the Bennington thing, it is amazing that how quickly it changes. 24 hours ago, we wouldn't be talking about him being a valuable asset to trade for necessarily. But how would you have had, because John Cooper, again, masterclass, you won. You did it the right way. Would you have gone Bennington the whole way? What would you have done if you're in the coach's shoes?
Well, you know, I wouldn't have. After the U.S. game, and it would have been unfair because there was no run support there for Jordan Bennington in that game either. But in the first couple of games, he was a bit leaky. And in a short tournament like that,
Yeah.
you give up a bad goal here or there, and that can be the difference. But I said this last night post game in our coverage. Maybe that's maybe that's part of what factors into being the Stanley Cup champion, both as a player, as a goalie, and ultimately as a coach. Because I'm reminded of what John Cooper said when he made the decision that Jordan Bennington was going to be his starting goalie. And he said he's got fire in his belly. I just love the compete. And look, I mean, with all due respect to Adin Hill, it's not like he was on top of his game coming into Four Nations either. But is that one of those ingredients as part of that recipe for success that you don't know unless you've experienced and you've seen it firsthand as a head coach? And maybe that's what Cooper, in doing his research, saw in Jordan Bennington. So I was a bit surprised, but I don't think that Adin Hill did a great job of pushing the scenario either. He wasn't given a chance at the Four Nations, but coming in, I mean, I don't think that, there was a real march by him to say, okay, since you named the roster, I'm now proving that I'm the better of the two. That wasn't the case.
Because I thought it was a cool moment. They showed the embrace between Cooper and Bennington, and you just think for Bennington, it's like you were the one guy, who believed in me and stuck with me, and for the coach, like, I stuck with you and you came through for me, because everybody thought I was maybe crazy for sticking with. Pretty cool moment there for those two guys.
Did you see? You guys probably watched the pregame. I mean, I don't know if you watched the Canadian version or the American version. I watched the Canadian version, and Elliott did a sit down with both goalies, and I found it a bit humorous, but also telling. As all the shenanigans were unfolding Saturday night, I mean, somewhat fun approach question angle was, did you ever consider, racing down the sheet? But in Bennington's case, it's a fair question because he's a fiery dude, man. The wires will touch with him. And he was just like, no. And Hellebuck wouldn't even go there. Like, he was just like, what are you talking about? But anyway, I mean, I think it's not a turning point in his career because he's decorated to this point, but you think it's easy staring down at Connor Hellebuck, expecting that, okay, he's going to win another Vezina trophy. And then you flip it, and we chewed on this off air as a group, wondering, okay, well, what about that chorus of naysayers that think that, Hellebuck's regular season numbers are stellar. He can't win the big game and he doesn't win the big series. Is that a fair criticism? And I didn't think it was, even though we've heard and we've all talked about that in the past, and I don't know of the goals from last night that beat him, any of them his fault. And the answer to that would be no, or probably not. But Jordan Bennington saved the game with the game on the stick of Austin Matthews in overtime. Made three terrific saves in overtime. And one was obviously better than the other guy who's won a Vezina, is going to win another one.
Yeah.
Who's you mentioned Bennington. Is there another player that you just think, wow, this tournament is a changing moment in the way that the hockey world perceives them, or is it a coming out party, or ooh, this guy doesn't have it anymore? Like, we're already starting to see give us your mock Olympic roster this morning, which is hilarious and fun. But for you, who really moved the needle either way?
Well, in a positive sense, Thomas Harley. I mean, he's a good young defenseman. But I wouldn't have had Thomas Harley on my bingo card coming into this event. And now I'm thinking about, and I'm sure Hockey Canada management is, hey, we gotta watch this guy for the Olympic team, and imagine what he faced coming in. Like, I was in Montreal at the practice facility in Brossard, where, he's like a kid standing behind the bench in the hallway, just fully geared up, like, can I go out on the ice yet, coach? Like, I mean, come on, it was bonkers. And then he ends up having to play, right? And was terrific in that game against the United States. He maybe wasn't quite as clean and crisp to start yesterday, but still had a very, very, very good game. And the other one, we do Ottawa Senators games regionally, so I watch Jake Sanderson a lot. I think he's going to be a star in the NHL. I mean,
they paid him early. They knew. Like what we're seeing, that's not surprising the Sens at all.
No, it's not. And then, it's an unfair ask to have to come in and replace Charlie McAvoy, but Sanderson's no slouch. So those are two guys. If I were going to be overly critical, I would say we've probably seen the last of Seravalli on the international scene. As an example, I gotta hope and believe that Canada is going to have younger players that
Celebrini for me. Just plug them right in, right?
Exactly. And Crosby's going to be on the Olympic team, as he should be. He didn't look as crisp yesterday. Like we knew he was banged up coming into the Four Nations, and he didn't have that same physical pop or drive, and so whatever he's got going on, I think was starting to wear on him going into that final.
I was just going to say it's an interesting one but we'll move on for Winnipeg, because your goalie lost in overtime. Morrissey couldn't play because he was sick. Connor was a healthy scratch. Shifley didn't go. Not a big exciting tournament for all those Jets players that ended up going.
Yeah, I didn't get the Kyle Connor decision. I didn't. I know that he had a quiet tournament, right? He did. I mean, Mitch Marner scores the overtime winner against the Swedes, but aside from that, he was super quiet, playing with the best player in the game and Connor McDavid for the first couple of games. And then they give him another opportunity, and he was terrific last night when it mattered. Kyle Connor is one of the best shots in the sport, period. Like, you couldn't use that, with all due respect to Chris Kreider. I mean, if you feel you need Kreider in that lineup for whatever reason, find somebody else.
Brock Nelson wasn't undeniable. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There were some guys you could have moved around.
I agree with that, though. So that one surprised me.
Hey, guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out more of our content right here on the Flames Nation YouTube page. We had a bunch of great long-form interviews. You can check out some videos we've done as well outside of the studio. And, of course, if you want more writing or merchandise stuff, flamesnation.ca or nationgear.ca. Appreciate you watching.